Hey everybody, welcome back to Readers That Write. Today, I am tackling the most requested thing that I have seen in my comments. And that is, which story should you start with in Warhammer 40k if you want to go faction specific? This has taken me a couple weeks to actually get created and get everything in order. And even now, I've still got a bunch of paperwork in front of me and the book covers over here on my left. And it's been a lot of fun. And I really hope you guys find this helpful. So I started with a couple parameters. The first being, they have to have a codex in most cases. There's a few at the very end that you'll notice I threw in there mostly because I like the books. And if they have a codex, then we go with that as the baseline. If they have more stories than just the codex, and to be clear, there are two that only have stories in the codex. And unfortunately, one of those two is my main faction currently. But you have to stick around and see which ones those are. And if they have something beyond the codex, that is where we went. Now, I also put some stipulations, especially when we get to the Space Marines and the Chaos Space Marines. I tried to resist Horus Heresy era stories because honestly, those would be some of the best stories to start with for all of the Space Marine factions, really. At least the core factions. But I didn't want to suggest those because they're very hard to just jump into. Unfortunately, the Horus Heresy is a wide-spanning, multiple stories, hundreds of POV level universe that if you don't read them in order, you're going to miss important stuff and you're going to miss big things in the stories you're reading. And it's going to be really confusing. And unfortunately, there's one faction in here that did have to stick with heresy because they just don't really exist in literature later on. My other big rule was that they needed to be a main point of view in the story. This was really hard for certain factions, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But there are several factions that are literally only the bad guys, and that's the only time they ever show up. And I didn't want to just put a generic, they're the bad guy in this story book. I could have done that, and it would have been a lot easier on some of these, but I tried to find a story that at least had some POV from it so that you get some representation of your faction. Now, I'll go over details as we get there. I have not read all of these. A lot of these, probably at least half of these recommendations are coming from Reddit and my play group and friends I know at the game store so that I could cover all of these. Every single one of these is on my TBR, but there are ones that I personally can't recommend, but have come highly recommended from enough people that I trust it. So if you disagree with any of my suggestions, please let me know in the comments below. If you have alternatives, please let me know. I'm big into the Warhammer 40k universe. I've only been reading it for about 4 or 5 years now. So I'm nowhere near fully read and caught up on everything. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the best stories to read are for several of my factions and my playgroup's factions so that I can make sure I get the lore right. And finally, there will be the book cover that pops up. It'll show up right here throughout the entire video as we talk about it. And before and after each faction, I'll have a display that shows up here instead of the video to show all of them. I will be posting those on social media over the next week after this comes out. So make sure you check me out there and get your information so that you can start your journey with either your faction you're already playing with or a faction that you found fascinating or a faction you're considering playing. I absolutely recommend that. It's always fun to get deeper into Warhammer 40k, the game, if you know the lore, and vice versa. So we're going to dive into it with the Xenos, because I feel like the Xenos always come last in Warhammer. They're not commonly represented. So we'll dive into it right now. Okay, so let's dive into the Xenos, the oft-forgotten sect of the Warhammer 40k universe. There are a few of these guys that do pop up quite regularly and have a major role in the story, but there are several others that don't. So if you see me looking over this way, I have on my screen the actual book covers, so I can make sure I'm crediting the correct author. I don't want to accidentally miscredit somebody. And you'll be seeing them popping up right about the same spot I'm looking, so you'll be able to see them as well. We're going to move pretty fast through this, so feel free to pause it, take notes, take screenshots, whatever you need to do to find the books you're needing to start your faction first. And we're going to start with my little brother's faction, actually, the Eldar, or Aeldari. And the story that comes recommended highly for them is called Path of the Warrior by Gav Thorpe. Gav Thorpe is one of the major Warhammer 40k authors and has been for a little while. I've read several books that he's written. This is not one of them. I've heard some differing opinions on a lot of the Eldar books. They do tend to be a faction that's a little bit hard to relate to sometimes due to the age of their faction and a lot of the approaches they have to the universe around them. But from everything I was reading and from everyone I've talked to who have read these are, or this series that starts with the Path of the Warrior is the story that that's best recommended for the Eldar. Next, we're going to move on to one of my favorite factions. I've got a small army of them that I enjoy playing, and they were a lot of fun to paint. I've got just over 1,000 points of them, and that is the Drukari. The Drukari are amazing to study. They are corrupted Eldar that go down a wild path, just trying to stay alive and trying to save their souls. And it's a really, really cool perspective, and it's something that I've never really thought of. And it does spark my curiosity as a professional author as well to imagine what you can do with this type of a relationship or a rapport where they have to do these crazy, dark and depraved things in order to preserve themselves and their souls beyond just the recent future. And that the book that is always recommended to start with on that is The Path of the Renegade by Andy Chambers. Once again, I haven't read it. Drukari lore is something that I'm planning on diving into pretty deeply as soon as I finish the Heresy, and I'm about halfway through the Heresy books. That has been a long path, taking me at least over a year to even get to the halfway point. But both this book and the Path of the Warrior series are both on my TBR, and I hope to get into them quickly because my brother plays a Ynnari army, at least currently. He's leaning far more to Craftworld than he is Drukari, but knowing the lore behind them would be a lot of fun and a lot of cool things I can discuss with him. Next is a faction that I don't know a lot about, to be honest, and it's because it doesn't relate to any of the factions I currently play or the factions I've read a lot about, and that's the Genestealers Cult. The Genestealers are very interesting, and the little lore I do know makes me want to know more. So I'm sure I will be diving into it, especially with how highly the book that represents them is rated. I've heard rave reviews on this one from a lot of people I trust and a lot of the Warhammer community, and that is Day of Ascension by, oh my gosh, I'm probably going to butcher his last name, by Adrian, I think it's Tchaikovsky. But If I butchered that name, I apologize. I've just never actually heard it said. But I have heard just rave reviews about this book, so it is an absolute recommendation for me. It will be in my TBR as soon as I can get through the heresy. I try and move through Warhammer books at least every other book. Sometimes I'll do 2 or 3 in a row. But I do also have a lot of friends and authors that I follow that are releasing quite regularly that I've got to work in there as well. So, Day of Ascension, big suggestion for Genestealers. Next, we're going to move on to my faction. At least my main faction currently. My main faction currently is the Leagues of Votann. I absolutely love these guys. The little lore that exists for them is fascinating. And I really hope that this answer will not age well. But currently, if you want Leagues of Votann lore, the only place you're going to get it is the Codex. There are some very good stories in the Codex, but unfortunately, that is all that exists. Currently, I don't know how many people are actually playing it. From what I've heard, it's not a heavily played army because it is only partially fleshed out. It is marginally playable at a 2,000 point game. Luckily, my play group tends to play at about 1,000 points, so I can field that army and I can do well. At 2,000 points, you have a lot of repeats, and you basically only have 2 or 3 tricks you can do. So it's not the most competitive. It does decently well in the competitive circuits, but it's not really taking the crown anywhere. But my hope is, as 10th edition continues, it will fill out more, and we'll see, hopefully, a book. And Games Workshop, if you haven't already found an author to write a Leagues of Votann story, give me a call. I absolutely would love to write a Leagues of Votann story. Whether it be short or long, whatever, I am in for that. I've already written a couple, mostly to help me with a narrative campaign that we're currently running. But I absolutely love them. They are the faction closest to my heart. Well, one of the 2 factions closest to my heart. We'll talk about my Space Marines faction coming up in a little while and why they're important to me as well. But once again, you only got the 9th edition Codex, unfortunately. Next, let's move on to one of the more well-documented factions. 2 of the next 3 are probably the most written about factions in Warhammer 40k, including, with the Necrons, one of the highest rated books that I've heard of, period. The Infinite Divine is one of the highest rated Warhammer 40k books that I can see on Goodreads and on Amazon. It's also another one that's gotten rave reviews from everybody who's done it in a reading group that I've seen, or a book club, or read it on their own. It gets referenced quite regularly and has become a staple for any references to the Necrons across the board. So this one was a pretty obvious one for me. There are several others that could be good starting points, but in my opinion, you want to start with the thing that will hook you the most, so that you make sure you get pulled in to the faction in the best way possible. And from everything I've heard, Infinite and the Divine by Robert Rath. I apologize, I did not mention his name earlier. Yes, Robert Rath, also a very famous Warhammer 40k author, but check this one out if you're even interested in Necron lore. Next is probably the most difficult faction to write about, and weirdly enough, it has a book. That's the Tyranids. The Tyranids are a very, very fascinating faction that really do bring a lot of the terror to the 40k universe and drive a lot of the narrative, especially currently as 10th edition opened with the Leviathan box. And the book that has come recommended by Tyranid players and Tyranid fans is actually the companion to the Leviathan box, and that's Leviathan by Darius Hinks. I've heard great things about that one too. I have not read it yet, but everything I've seen about it, it is the go-to opener to learn about the Tyranids. So make sure you check that out. Next, we are going to go to the Great Wa, or the Orks. They have a lot of books, and the few Orc books I've read, they are very fun to read, and they are very fun to write. If you need a little bit of a lighthearted, it's probably not the best way to put it. I can't think of a better way to describe it. Entrance to Warhammer 40k, they are your faction. While they are absolutely brutal and bloodthirsty, they do have a very unique way of tying in humor on top of the standard Warhammer 40k feel to them. There are several different places I could go to start this one. And frankly, in all of the discussion with the community, this was the one that pulled the most differing opinions. From everything I could see, there's 4 or 5 different places that are fantastic. And the one that had a slightly higher rating on a lot of the book review sites, and is the one that I have read, is what I'm going to recommend. And that is Brutal Cunning by Mike Brooks. Excuse me, Brutal Cunning. I have to put that in the correct orc tone, or I am failing miserably. So, make sure you check that out if you're a big Orcs fan. I do recommend that one. That is one that I've read. It was a personal favorite of mine last year when I read it. It was a great divide when I was going through the first wave of brutality with this Event 5 in the Horus Heresies, and it was a great change. So, I absolutely recommend it. And the last of the Xenos is the Tau. This one I have not read. It is a faction I know very, very little about. Kind of like the Genestealers. But I've started to learn a little bit more about them, and I actually managed to pick up the new Tau Codex, and they've intrigued me, to say the least. And I'm going to be doing a lot more reading on them and learning about them, and maybe picking up some units to test out here in the near future. And the book that everyone recommended to start with for this is Farsight, Crisis of Faith by Phil Kelly. I've heard a lot of good things about this story. It gets referenced a lot. For example, I hear it a lot on Tabletop Tactics anytime that Tau Army is being played and Commander Farsight is on the board. They do make a lot of references to it, and it does come recommended by those guys pretty heavily. So, check that out. And these are the Xenos. Keep in mind, these will also be on my social media. So, make sure you check that out if you need to go back and look at it or need it for a reference later. And feel free to screenshot and comment below if you have any recommendations or options that you like better. And I will be happy to do a follow-up on this if there's any major changes or suggestions or people universally disagree on one of them. So, next, we are going to move over to Chaos. And all of its intricacies. Whew, can't talk there. And we'll talk about some of the darker side of the Warhammer 40k universe. Okay, everybody, let's dive into Chaos now. It's one of my new intrigues in the Warhammer 40k universe, and does include one of my secondary factions that I'm currently working on building and painting right now. So, let's dive into this. I think the first one probably won't shock anybody. We're going to start with the Chaos Demons. While they are bad guys in a lot of stories, I couldn't find any books that really qualify them to actually be a character or characters in the story. Most of them are just the basic bare bones antagonists and problem children that show up to make things difficult for the main characters. So for that reason, I had to go with the Codex of Chaos Demons. From 9th edition is the current one. They do have some pretty good stories in there, but that is pretty much the only place you're going to find anything directly about the Chaos Demons. Like I said, they're referenced throughout, especially in the Chaos world and in the Heresy, but the only place you'll get anything definitive is in the Chaos Demons Codex. Next is one that I find really fascinating. I don't know a lot about them, and that is the Chaos Knights. The Chaos Knights do show up in the Heresy quite a bit, so I did have to apply the no heresy if something else is written rule for this one. They do have some pretty good stuff in the Heresy, but this one I have not actually read. It's Apex Predator by Gavin G. Smith. It does have a lot of really good reviews, so if you're into Chaos Knights, definitely check that out. It is a short story that's a standalone that your Black Library, and it does, like I said, it has great reviews. A lot of people have said they love it, and from what I've heard, it does inspire several of the paint jobs that I've seen of Chaos Knights as well. Next is one you will not see on the tabletop very often, or almost ever, and that is the Chaos Titans Legion. The Chaos Titans are a fascinating part of the lore, especially in the Horus Heresy, which is when I was really introduced to the Titans. Before that, a lot of the books I'd read were on a smaller scale and didn't involve anything that grand. And for both the Chaos and the Imperial Legions of Titans, there's one book that comes recommended by everyone beyond everything I could see, and that is Titanicus by Dan Abnett. Dan is one of my favorite authors in the Warhammer 40k universe, and everything I've heard about this gets glowing reviews, so make sure you check that out. It's definitely on my TBR. I'd love to learn more about Titans, and I feel like this book would be the way to start. Okay, now we're going to cross into the realm of Chaos Space Marines. There are a lot of them, so we're going to try and go as quickly as we can through them to make sure we don't make this video too long. It's probably already going to be close to an hour long, just because we have 25 factions to cover roughly. And I'm trying to minimize the needless babble as much as I can, even though I'm doing it right now. So, Iron Warriors. This was one that I could not find anything worthwhile outside of the Heresy. So, I went with my favorite Heresy book about them that actually inspired me at least to consider creating an Iron Warriors army eventually. This is not the one I referred to earlier that I'm playing with actively. I will get to those guys in just a minute. But that book is Angel Exterminatus. It is a fantastic view into the Legion and what they believe and what their position is going into the Horus Heresy. So, if you are willing to give the time to the Horus Heresy, this is a definite. The beginning does spoil a lot of the Heresy. So, if you aren't already heavily spoiled, which you might be at this point, I would be careful with that. Especially if you're planning on reading the entire Heresy to get the entire picture. Next is my least favorite legion of all of the Space Marine legions. And I'm sure I'm going to get a little flack for that, although I think more people agree with me than disagree. That's the Word Bearers. Yeah. They are a very, very interesting faction that is, in my opinion, one of the worst types of heresy. A lot of the Space Marine legions have a good reason for doing what they did and why they went the direction they did. But in my opinion, the Word Bearers don't really. There are Word Bearers inside the Legion that do, but the Word Bearers as a whole do not. They were the problem child from the beginning. And I would say, besides this book, the other place you could start is the Horus Heresy itself. They're laced through the entirety, and you get a really good picture of who they are and how they work. But for non-heresy books, because that is the rule that I set for myself, it's Dark Apostle by Anthony Reynolds. Almost said Renault, and that is wrong. Anthony Reynolds. It does have a lot of really good reviews, and I've heard some good things about it. I don't know if I'm going to be reading this in the future. I have learned to very much hate the word bearers because of the heresy. So we'll see. Maybe I'll come around to them. The next is probably the most disturbing Space Marine faction in existence. While I don't like these guys either, I can at least understand them a little bit. And that is the Night Lords. This book I've heard rave reviews about. Once again, haven't read it. A lot of the Space Marine factions, unless they're heresy, I haven't read them, with the exception of one we'll talk about in a little, or actually two that we'll talk about in a minute. But Soul Hunters by Aaron Dembski-Bowden has gotten rave reviews from pretty much everyone who I know that's read it. They absolutely love it. So I definitely put it at the top of that list. The next is the Black Legion. The smelting of all of the other Chaos factions, plus Loyalists that fell. The Black Legion is the core of the driving faction of Chaos Space Marines. And this is started off and kicked off very well in the Talon of Horus, once again by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. He's a big Chaos writer and has done a lot. And this is another one that I've actually read. It was fantastic. It's a good kickoff to the understanding of who the Chaos Space Marines are and what their goals are in the universe. The next is the other Legion I don't really like. That's the Alpha Legion. I've got beefs with them for very different reasons than I have with the Word Bearers, or the Night Lords, or the Death Guard, which we'll talk about next. But in the Renegade series, Hero Master is the most recommended one. Once again, I don't know if I'll read it. Not a huge Alpha Legion fan, not a huge fan of their stories. It's a difficult read for me. It was in the Heresy, and maybe different in 40k, but I don't know if it'll start off. I'll have to get through most of the Black Library before I consider it. But I've heard great recommendations about it. So if the Alpha Legion introduced you, start there. The next one is the Death Guard. I am a White Scars player first. That is my first Legion. That is where I've delved into a lot of the lore. I do not like the Death Guard. They are the antithesis and the mortal enemy of my Legion for a lot of very good reasons that are covered in the Heresy. But the Lords of Silence by Chris Wright is the one that everyone suggests starting with. I heard a lot of really good reviews about it. So if you want to get to know Death Guard, start there. Now, my Chaos Legion that I do actively play with, I'm working on getting them painted. I've got a table full of partially painted Thousand Suns currently. And when I'm painting them, I do enjoy listening to the audiobook version of these. And that is the Ahriman series. Ahriman Exile is the first book in the series by John French. They are fantastic. It's a really cool insight to how the modern Thousand Suns function, or the 40k Thousand Suns function. Because, at least in the Heresy where I'm at, you've seen them broken and they're still uncommitted to the cause. So seeing where they go and what they become is super fascinating, and John French does a fantastic job capturing that. Now, for a Legion that I empathize with a little bit, but isn't one of my main factions. I did actually try and play with them on tabletop and struggled a little bit. That's the World Eaters. They are a really cool faction with a really cool storyline. And if you want to read about them, the one I suggest starting with, if you're not doing the Heresy, is Angron the Red Angel. It is by Dan Geimer. It is a fantastic book. This is one of the ones I have read. I absolutely love it. It's really interesting to learn about Angron as the Demon Primarch, and it does do a lot of flashbacks into who he was and where he came from. And when it comes to the World Eaters, if you can understand Angron, you can understand the World Eaters themselves. So that is an absolute recommendation for me, and I do deeply suggest you read it if you're even curious about who the World Eaters are and what their motivations are. The last member of Chaos that we'll be covering is another one of the factions that I really can't empathize with very much. It doesn't strike a chord with me. And that is the Followers of Slaanesh, the Emperor's Children. Now, we're running them out mostly because I thought it was kind of funny that we end with them when they are the last Chaos faction on this list, to potentially get a codex. That even hasn't been confirmed yet, but all of the signs indicate to that. And hopefully they do. I'd love to see it. Not my faction. I will probably never touch them, and I don't know anyone in my play group that will. But the book that came recommended for them is another book in the Renegade series called The Lord of Excess. And it gives a much deeper dive into the 40K version of the Emperor's Children. There are the Fabius Bile series as well that I've heard recommended, but this one, from what everyone was suggesting, is the best place to start because you get the lay of the land with the Emperor's Children. So, once again, if you liked my suggestions, let me know in the comments below. If you have alternatives, please also let me know. I'm always looking for different directions to go to learn about all these factions. So, comment below. If you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe. This was a lot of work to do, and if you're this far in and you haven't subscribed yet, just hit the button. Don't forget to ring the little bell, and so that you'll get notified when I have anything new coming out. We've got a bunch of cool stuff planned for the next several weeks, so stick around. And next we'll jump into the non-Space Marine Imperium. There's a lot to cover there, so we'll cruise through those as well, and we'll end with the Space Marines. Welcome back. Next we're going to tackle the non-Space Marine Imperium, the part of the Imperium that sometimes gets forgotten in the video games and the display pieces for Games Workshop, but are the real core of what the Imperium is. It's a lot of fun to talk about these factions. They're ones that I've grown to love a lot lately, and I've become fascinated with, and I'm going to be diving even further into them moving forward. One of them was actually the entire reason I was pulled into Warhammer 40k in the first place. And I've already talked about this a lot on this channel, including a book review on this book a couple weeks ago. But first, let's start with the Adeptus Sororitas, or the Sisters of Battle. They are one of my new fascinations when it comes to the Warhammer 40k universe. And the first book that I'm going to recommend is one that I've read and I absolutely love and made me want to know more about it, or about this faction, and that is The Mark of Faith by Rachel Harrison. It is an absolute recommendation for me, and you should definitely check it out if you're curious about the Adeptus Sororitas. The next is the Emperor's Golden Voice, as they're often affectionately referred to in the Warhammer 40k community, the Adeptus Custodes. The Custodes are a fascinating faction in all of Warhammer 40k because a lot of what they do isn't known publicly, and when they show up, things are usually very bad. And it's been fun to learn a lot about them, especially in the Heresy. But the Watcher of the Throne series that starts out with The Emperor's Legion by Chris Wright is one that's definitely recommended if you're wanting to learn more about the Custodes or break into more Custodes lore. It has massive reviews online, and I've heard a lot of good things about it from people who have read it. It is on my TBR. I don't know when I'll be able to get to it, but it is one that I do really want to read. And maybe we'll tackle that one here in the near future. The next one is along with the Infinite Divine, one of the highest rated books in all of the Black Library, besides several of the Heresy books. It's one that is a split POV, with half of it being the next faction on the list, which is Adeptus Mechanicus, and the other being Fabius Bile, and that is Gene Father. There are a lot of very good Adeptus Mechanicus books in the Horus Heresy that I could have picked, but the modern AdMech is not the same as the Mechanicum of the Heresy. There have been a lot of stagnation and changes in the 40k AdMech, and this book encapsulates it almost perfectly. I couldn't think of a better one to represent the AdMech in this story. So it is an absolute read. The next one, the Astra Militarum. This was a no-brainer for me. This was the book that pulled me in and was the entire reason I became a Warhammer 40k fan. I do have some friends that play and are very into the lore, but the staple hook for me that really brought me into the Warhammer 40k universe is The First and Only by Dan Abnett. That is the first story in the Gonskos series. If you're looking for it in print, the print book actually has 3 books in it. It's called The Founding. It is the length of a Brandon Sanderson novel. So if you're looking for the ebook or audiobook version, you'll find it under First and Only. And I do recommend the audiobook version as well. The narrator is fantastic. But as I've said several times, Dan Abnett is my favorite Warhammer 40k author and has had a lot of influence on me as a writer. And this series is why. It's, in my opinion, one of the best book series as a whole across all of Warhammer 40k. So starting with Gonskos is a no-brainer. I know there are several other Astra Militarum or Imperial Guard stories that are laced throughout that have great reviews as well, but personally, I'm biased. Start with First and Only. Next is the Grey Knights. It's another faction I don't know a lot about. I know they do come up more in the Heresy as I move through it. And I do want to learn about them eventually. They are interesting. But it's another faction I don't encounter very much on the tabletop, so I just haven't been drawn to them. But the story that got rave reviews for the Grey Knights is The Emperor's Gift by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. I feel like I've said his name a lot. Between him and Dan Abnett, they're probably about half the list. But it's an absolute recommendation. There have been so many reviews on this that were all fantastic, and they are, in my experience, they're usually not wrong. Next is another one that I have read. This trilogy is a fantastic introduction to the Inquisition and the Imperial Agents. And that is the Eisenhorn series that starts off with the Book of Xenos. It is a great introduction to the deeper espionage and religious side of the Imperium. It's a part that you don't get to see a lot, especially when you're reading Space Marine books, but they were really good. There are some points that do struggle a little bit, but it's another Dan Abnett book, so easily moves up to one of the tops in my personal opinion in the Black Library. Dan, like I said, major influence, and I am a major fan of his. So make sure you check that out. We are cruising through these to try and not have an hour-long video. I don't know if we're going to make it. We still got 2 more sections to go, but we are going to try. Now, we are on to Imperial Knights. Imperial Knights are a really, really cool faction for me, especially with their introduction that I really got to connect with in the Horus Heresy in the early settings. So this is one that I'm going to be doing a lot more reading on to learn what they're like in 40k. And pretty much the universal suggestion for Imperial Knight books is Kingblade by Andy Clark. So check that out. And last on this list is actually a book we've already talked about. But just like for the Chaos Titans, for Imperial Titans, the book Titanicus by Dan Abnett is the hands-down favorite that I could see. This one is going to quickly be on my list. I'll probably squeeze it in between heresy books here coming up in the next couple of months. I've got 2 or 3 more books that I need to finish, along with a few more heresy books before I get there. But I'm hoping mid to end of summer I'll be able to get to Titanicus or one of the other ones on this list that I haven't read yet. So, if you think you have a better recommendation for any of these factions, please comment below. And everyone, please check the comments below to see if there's any other recommendations as well. I know for several of these factions, there are several other potential starting points, especially now that we're into the Imperium. But these are my suggestions of where to start. If there are others below, great. I want to hear them. Next, we're going to move into the Space Marines. And first, we're going to do the 9 Loyalist Legions that remain loyal during the heresy, and then we'll get into some of the other legions as well. Legions and specialty forces as well. So, stick with me. We're almost there. And like I said in the last section, if you still haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Just hit the subscribe button. We got a lot of really cool stuff coming. If you like Warhammer content, writing content, pop culture content, we're going to cover it. And we've got a lot of really cool stuff that we can share, and a cool community that's starting to form. So, like and subscribe, and if you haven't already, ring the little bell. By doing that, you'll get notified anytime we've got new videos coming out. And let's dive into the Space Marines. Okay, everybody, we're on the last stretch. First, we're going to deal with the core 9 legions of Space Marines, and then we've got some successor chapters we're going to cover with just a couple more pages, or a couple more recommendations, not pages, to tie us up and get us ready to go. So, first, we are going to start with the poster boys, because why not start with the poster boys and get them out of the way? That is the Ultramarines. This is a legion you see everywhere. Most of the box art is Ultramarines. Most of the posters you see with a Space Marine are Ultramarines. Most of the time you see it represented anywhere around you, it's probably Ultramarines, with some rare exceptions. And just like the rest of everything in Warhammer, when it comes to Space Marines, these guys have a lot of books. There are a lot of Ultramarine stories. And they're a key faction in the current Warhammer 40k setting as well. And they can be a little bit overwhelming to try and figure out where to start. For me, I love the Uriel Ventress books written by Graham McNeil, who is tied to a lot of the Ultramarine books. The first book in that one is Nightbringer, so make sure you check that out. It is a great place to start if you also want to get into Space Marine lore to start with, which is the other reason I want to start with it. It's a good introduction to how modern or 40k Space Marine factions are supposed to work if they follow the Codex. Next, we're going to go on to the Imperial Fists. A legion that I am slowly learning to appreciate, but are not my favorite. The recommendation for them is another Dan Abnett book. I have not read this one, but it's on my list, mostly because Dan wrote it, and I do want to learn more about the Imperial Fists a little bit and see what they're like in 40k. It's called I Am Slaughter. So I Am Slaughter by Dan Abnett is the place to start for Imperial Fist lore. Next is one of the least written about of the 9 loyal Space Marine legions. It was actually a miracle that I was able to find an entire book that qualifies. That wasn't a heresy novel, and that is the Iron Hands. They have a book called The Eye of Medusa that, by David Gaiman that did come very highly recommended, and a lot of people had a lot of good things to say about it. So definitely check it out if you're interested in the Iron Hands. Next is one of my two favorite of the 9 loyal Space Marine legions, and that is the Raven Guard. They don't have a lot of lore behind them. Even in the Heresy, they only have a couple books. But for Warhammer 40k, the main recommendation is Shrike. It is a good introduction to what the current Raven Guard look like and how they operate. So check out Shrike by George Mann if you're wanting to learn about Raven Guard. And I do apologize, we are cruising as fast as we can because we need to get this over with. It's been a lot of work and I want to get this wrapped up, but I would love to talk to you guys more in the comments below. So make sure you're chiming in, letting me know your recommendations if you think I missed one, or if you've read any of these and want to recommend them yourself, please do that as well. Next is the Salamanders and the Sons of Vulcan. These guys also don't have a ton of lore, surprisingly. They seem like the faction I would write about the most if I could, besides my two favorites. Just because they have a lot more depth to them in the little lore they have. And the book that comes recommended for this is Salamander by Nick Kime for the Salamanders. It does have a really cool story from what I was able to see, and it is on my TBR because I do want to learn more about the Salamanders. They are a very interesting faction for me. The next one is my First Legion. They have a lot of really, really cool lore that isn't too commonly brought up in the Warhammer 40k universe, and that is the White Scars. For those of you who know me, I am part Lipka Tatar, or European Mongol. Got the helmet right there. And the White Scars are based on my ancestors, so they were the immediate draw for me. And the last hunt did not disappoint. Robbie McIvan does a fantastic job. McIvan. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, so I apologize if I butchered it. But I did absolutely love it. I do absolutely recommend it. If you're even curious at all about the White Scars, this is a good place to start. They do have a good collection of short stories as well, and if you want to start there. And next we're going to move into the non-codex Space Marines. These 3 chapters do have a lot of lore behind all of them for pretty good reason. The first is the Space Wolves. The book that a lot of people recommend starting with is Legacy of the Wolfen by David Annandale and Robbie McNiven. That is a good starting place for learning about who these guys are. Space Wolves have a lot of intricate lore that's very deep and very complicated. So starting here is a good recommendation because it does deal with some of the key aspects of what the Space Wolves are and what they do. The next is a legion that I've gotten a lot of sympathy for while reading the Heresy. I hadn't been really interested in them before, but they do a lot of really cool and intriguing stuff during the Heresy that has made me want to learn more. And the place that everyone talks about starting is The Devastation of Baal by Guy Haley. This is another one of those massively recommended books that people are constantly talking about. So I definitely start there if you're curious in the Blood Angels and who they are and what they do and who Dante is. So definitely another recommendation. And finally, the last of the 9 is the First Legion. I don't know how they ended up at the last, but they did. I just kind of created this list arbitrarily. So this is another absolute recommendation for me. I'm a big fantasy fan as much as I am science fiction and Warhammer fan, and this kind of ticked all of my boxes. And it's The Lion, Son of the Forest by Mike Brooks. It is a really, really fascinating story. You get to learn more about Lionel Johnson, the Primarch of the Dark Angels, in a very different light than you get to see him in the Heresy. And it's a story that I absolutely loved, and I can't wait to see where the story goes from here. So, if you're at all curious about the Dark Angels and want to learn about them a little bit more, this is a story for you. So, we only have a few successor chapters to go, and then we'll wrap this up. But I know I've said this a few times now. If you aren't subscribed, please do. You've watched like 40 minutes of this video already. There's no reason to not hit the subscribe button because I've got a lot of cool stuff coming up, and clearly you're enjoying this. So, like and subscribe, and ring the little bell so you get notifications. And if you've got other suggestions for any of these Space Marine factions that we've just talked about, comment them below. I want to hear what other cool stuff might be out there. The Black Library has a lot of books, so there may be some that I've never even heard of or seen that are better places to start, and I want to hear about them. So, stay tuned. We've only got 4 factions left, and then we are done. Okay, welcome back. We've got the last stretch to go. We've only got 5 factions left. And these are all successor chapters that have become extremely popular and have stories in the Warhammer 40k universe. So, we're going to start this off with the Crimson Fists, a successor chapter that I've heard about a lot about, that I'm interested to learn more about. And they've got a highly rated story called Rin's World, that by Steve Park. Let me make sure I get credit the author in there. That is a very highly rated book and is one of the books that made me want to learn more about them. Next is a faction that I do want to learn a lot about. They are a fascinating branch of the Space Marines and have a lot of really cool lore from what I've seen so far. This is on another one of those ones that's on my TBR that will be coming up soon, I hope. And that's Hell's Reach by Aaron Dembski Bowden, that talks about the Black Templars. And it's one that I definitely want to know more about. It's a really cool and fascinating story and backstory to who the Black Templars are, what they are, and what they represent. So definitely check out Hell's Reach if you are curious about the Black Templars. The next is not a successor chapter. It is a group of specialist Space Marines who mostly hunt Xenos. That is the DeathWatch. DeathWatch, The Last Guardian by CZ Dunn, is the pretty much universally recommended DeathWatch book to start with if you're curious in who the DeathWatch are and what they do. I have not read this one, but it does come very highly recommended. And the DeathWatch is a faction that I'm very curious about. And next we've got the Flesh Terrors, a branch of the Blood Angels that are far more ruthless than the more cautious Blood Angels. And their book, Flesh Terrors, by Andy Smiley, is a fantastic book. I absolutely loved it. I definitely would recommend it to any of you who are curious about the Flesh Terrors. They also have one of the coolest paint jobs when they actually hit the tabletop as well. So I know they're very popular for that as well. And last but not least is a very interesting sub-faction or successor chapter that does have a really cool story behind them. I haven't actually read this book, but I've heard a lot of the lore from one of my gaming buddies who does actually play them on the tabletop, and that's the Soul Drinkers. So the Soul Drinkers have a book called Soul Drinker by Ben Counter that is supposedly fantastic and definitely worth a check out. So if you need a one-off to learn some Space Marine lore and get interested in sub-factions and what they are, read Soul Drinker or Flesh Terrors. They are both fantastic books. Now, that wraps up my list of where to start based on your faction. If you have any comments or suggestions, let me know down below. I would love to hear your input on where we should start with books. A lot of these factions I haven't read a lot about, and I do want to learn more. So If you disagree with anything I've said so far or have any suggestions of other places people to start, let me know. And if you have any suggestions about upcoming Warhammer book videos, I've got some book reviews that'll be coming up. They're in the works, as well as a bunch of other stuff to kind of mix things up a little bit. But let me know any ideas or suggestions you have or things you want me to cover, and we will get to them as soon as we can.